So, Mandeep, Jonathan, you've both worked on projects together. Could you tell us a little bit about them?
I don't know. Do you want to start?
I can start. We
Cool.
first met in 2010, where Jonathan was invited to be a lighting mentor for a residency
I was
space.
helping the young choreographers through the thought process of light for their shows. Yeah.
So they kind of co-created the light design.
Yeah, that was the
for
idea,
works.
that they'd actually have the input into creating it and understand the
So
process.
There were 4 residents in that Gati Summer Dance residency in 2010, and so this dialogue happened maybe over a period of 3 to 4 weeks.
I think it was maybe even more. It was quite a process, yeah.
And then after that, we started collaborating on independent creative projects.
I came to see Inhabited Geometry
Yes, in 2010.
when I came back from the mountains.
Which is the first work I made in 2010. And so Jonathan had a few things to say about the lighting. And so the next time I was making something new, we went straight into a collaboration.
That was exactly the time when I started getting interested in exploring space and light as an environment. And we were talking about that, and you were interested, and I thought, that's fabulous, then we can try and work together on this. Yeah.
So the work that we then worked on in 2013 was called A Male Ant Has Straight Antennae, which explored sort of several notions of masculinity. And so we set up, I think maybe you should talk about that interesting setup.
That was really interesting, actually, because I had this concept of space, and we tried to get it made, but it was so expensive to get it made here that we started thinking about, like, I remember we were walking through the streets of Delhi, and I was like looking at scaffolding and saying, but really that's what we need, is the scaffolding. And Mandeep goes, okay, that's easy then, we can just get scaffolding in. And so we built this big scaffolding structure all around the stage in Kamani Theatre, and put all the lights in it, and it became this like very masculine outside space from where the dancers could extract themselves and look in. I remember at the beginning they would like going out and coming back into wings, and then that's what's really interesting actually about these collaborations always, is we have very strong propositions, and then somehow we meet on stage and just touch fingers of how these exist or coexist together.
And I think many of these projects then shifted some things for me quite permanently. Like from Male Ant onwards, I never went back to a kind of staging that had any kind of wings, where the dancers needed to be hidden away. And I began to think about how perhaps this idea of being viewed was more interesting than trying to hide away dancers when they were not on stage. So this question of what is the stage space, what is the performance space, and what isn't, is an interesting question for me.
And then somehow we were both, I guess, sort of drifting into more visual arts, performance art territory on our own journeys in our own respective lives. And then we met again a few years later for
Queen
Size, and we were very much into performance art and visual arts. I mean, that was
And I think there for me, the special thing, apart from the spatial kind of viewing structure that we kind of come up with, which was a 4-sided seating and a very intimate one, where the performer was kind of here and sometimes touching
we started talking a lot about that, about the relation between the spectators and the space and the performers. Yeah, I remember that.
And I think for me, the biggest rupture there was a time rupture, where this question of can the performance continue beyond 40 minutes, 1 hour, but actually become a durational work? And then what does the labor of that kind of a durational work, what kind of affect does that labor have on the audience members?
And that part always happens when we're working together in the same place, physically present. That part always happens there, where suddenly we're wondering about how this can become something else, or it needs to become something else. And that's when we started talking about loops and everything, and how we could have like random loops of orders of sequences. Yeah, I remember that. That was really fun.
And I think what's interesting is that in the last 3 weeks, always 3-4 weeks that we work together on any project, things change radically. So they kind of shift, and we begin to think about what kind of space is this an arena-like space, or is this a very intimate bedroom-like space? What kind of a space is it? And that changes the kind of configuration of the work completely.
Lots of conversations, yeah. Lots of love and respect as well for each other's work. I mean, which really makes it possible to hear any kind of feedback. At some point, you never really know where something's come from. It's just where it's going that's interesting us always.
Then we met in 2018 on a project called Pray, and it had several kind of iterations. And that's a work that actually, for me personally, kept shifting quite a bit over the years. I never quite settled on a final iteration of the work. And it was, I don't know how it was for you, but for me that was a really transition phase also.
For me, that was a funny time because I was working on this trilogy of eclipses. I was working on eclipses and I had three. One was in a contemporary art space, one was in dance space, and one was in theater space. And they were all related to death. In one piece was about the death of a musician. This one was about the death of a dear friend. And they were all around that. Something was happening that I was working on projects around death, and I wanted to do this trilogy suddenly of different various eclipses. That was quite a process to integrate into it, because at some point it even changed the direction of the dance a bit too much, actually, probably at some point.
Yeah, it was, for me personally, it was dealing with a lot of strong elements, actually. That building in Barakhamba had a very strong kind of structure. So there was a very particular kind of viewing that could happen there, and the work was made in the studio, so by the time it hit the space, everything needed to change.
So
it was a kind of a stressful moment for me.
In that colonial building.
Yes.
Yeah, it was beautiful though.
Yeah. And then we meet again now, thanks to the co-creation grant.
Thanks to the co-creation grant. Actually, Pro Helvetia has been like a helping hand through all of these years, which has been really great.
So tell us what co-creation means to you.
Start.
It's my turn, I guess, yeah. So, I mean, it can be many things. But in this case, I mean, I want to say probably it's about love, probably, to begin with. Like, there has to be a lot of love to be able to co-create something together, because you're in intense times, in doubtful times, and you need somebody to support you and have a critical eye on what you're doing and give feedback that you can trust. And that probably comes first from a lot of love, I'd say. And then there's the idea that you're accepting of somebody else's strong idea has to find a way to coexist with your own. And that's where all of this comes together. I'd say that's where it works or doesn't work, a co-creation.
I think for me also trust is central. I think if now over the years we have a relationship where I know that Jonathan we can work independently as well, and we know that actually there will be a moment where we can both trust the process of coming together and seeing how these ideas can sit together in relation to each other. And I also like the idea that, yes, at one level, for any kind of co-creation, we can exist on our own independent tracks and desires from a project, but there is also a way for those desires to meet and meet at the project and begin to kind of amalgamate into a project. And I've enjoyed that very much with our several interactions.
Yeah, very much so. But I think it's also like there's always difficult moments where things have to fit, and these are pleasant moments for us. Like, we really enjoy like working on what's not working, and these are always great discussions of which something new comes out, and that's it's a great process.
So tell us about Hallucinations and how you work together on it. Maybe if you have stories about it, or just generally.
Well, some stories we can't tell, I'm afraid.
Maybe I can tell you the kind of, by the time we had a conversation, I had some already kind of thinking about engaging with the form of the Tribhanga, which is this kind of three-way broken posture that's in most sort of ancient Indian sculpture. But by the time we met, in November last year, we began to think very much about the dancing girl in particular, the dancing girl of Mohenjo-daro, and realized that actually, because it's one of the first evidences of this posture and is kind of central to the history of Indian dance. We thought, why don't we actually just single this particular artifact out and see whether we can begin to respond to it and begin to make it come alive through dance and artificial intelligence.
And then we went to the museum and couldn't find it. You know, I'm joking, half joking, because it's so small. I was expecting it to be much bigger, and it's beautiful. And the expression on the face of Dancing Girl is inspiring to work with. I mean, there's so much you can project into it. For me, none of it is Dancing Girl, but that's another story. And I got really interested in what you were telling me about the political context of how Dancing Girl had been appropriated by the government, basically, and throughout time.
Yeah.
And how it was now a source of conflict also in between India and Pakistan, and how, in a way, I guess, sculpture doesn't really have a nationality or a passport or a country or and all of this seems
especially
really...
something which is 5,000 years old.
I know, yeah.
Which predates any sense of India, Pakistan, any of those things. Or Hindu, Muslim, any of those things, actually.
Exactly, and it got really fascinating to see also like how maybe some of the British interventions had like drawn lines to separate countries, had named Dancing Girl, Dancing Girl. It was I forget the name, but it's a British archaeologist who didn't actually find it. I think somebody else found it and he was called in. But
he named
her Dancing Girl, and this changed how we perceive this statue, which could be warrior. He could have named her Warrior Girl. She may very well have had a spear or something. There's hypothesis about this kind of thing. And then we were thinking about how it would be interesting to also reappropriate it in a more contemporary fashion. And that's when we started talking about maybe we could use AI to try and take the choreographies from the dancers and make the statue move with them and see what happened and see how this became something. And then that was a massive process for me. From there on, like understanding, because it's very experimental stuff, and understanding how these images became and what they meant, and these new kind of images, how we can use them, and even more so how we can use them in performance space. But then later on we also have installation space work to derive from this in this coming October, actually. It's opening. Yeah, I'm just stalling there.
I think those were all my questions. Did you want to add something to that?
You can maybe add something. Like, it's been a long, long process with the dancers. I mean, this is not just...
Yeah, actually, with this hallucinations of an artifact, I decided to give myself the luxury of time, of really staying with the vocabulary over years, over a couple of years, 2-3 years, intermittently, but sort of really diving deep into what the Tribhanga was proposing for the dancing body. And I think for me, it's also a culmination now this weekend of a long drawn process, which in the last 6 months has been quite exciting because it's had new inputs since our last conversation in November. It's had a new direction, and everything that we had done before that kind of got thrown up in the air, which has been exciting. And just to see how a work of 2-3 years can then land differently again by throwing it up through a collaboration like this.
It's been lovely.